We've got quite a few people with us already from all around the country. So, Samuel, over to you in what looks like a beautiful weather. It's rather grey here in Saint-Evenage. It's wet in Bristol, as somebody is saying who's looking in, but it looks rather better weather down where you are. So take it away, Samuel and Tim.
You know, gray and wet is something we don't know much about in the southern France, especially during those last couple of months. In fact, I was joking earlier, but we almost started doing the rain dance about 2-3 weeks ago, just to get the last few weeks of ripening. We are right now in the middle of the harvest. And I must say, I must like you guys, because after 10 hours or 11 hours day in the cellar, getting some grapes in, I'm still out talking to you. So thank you for getting me out of the cellar. It's been so far 3 weeks of intense harvest, but beautiful grapes coming in. And we still have, depending, today we stopped for a few days to let the Cabernet Sauvignon ripen, but we're hoping to finish maybe next week, maybe the week after. That will depend on whether the weather continue to be superb. And just a brief kind of introduction. I'm Samuel Guibert, second generation owner and winemaker of Mas de Daumas Gassac, which an estate that my 4 brothers and myself inherited about 25 years ago from my parents, the founder, and we now run kind of alongside a great team of people that help us bringing the best of the Gassac terroir.
Great, Samuel. Well, good evening to all the members that are joining us. As Ewan said, I'm the buyer responsible now for southern France, and I was delighted in January to visit Daumas Gassac for the first time because I took over from Marcel, who was the buyer for many years. Samuel, I think it might be useful just to start with a little bit of the history, because it's fascinating, the story about your parents and discovering the Gassac Valley. So maybe let's start with that.
So you're asking me to do a jump back in time about 50 years ago, in 1971. Both my parents, Aimé and Véronique, were not from the wine industry. They drank wine, but they didn't make wine and didn't come from a wine background. My father was in the leather business, and my mother was a teacher in Montpellier. And they decided to, when they met each other, they decided to found a family. And in order to raise 5 boys, they decided it was safer to do it in the countryside rather than the city. So they started looking for maybe a farm or an old place in the countryside. And in a little village called Agnan, which is about 25 kilometers north of Montpellier. So you have the Mediterranean Sea, Montpellier, which is halfway between Spain and Italy, and then Mas de Daumas Gassac, Agnan, and then further north, Paris. They found this old mas. By the way, mas in the Languedoc mean old farm. And the name Daumas is the name of the farmer that used to live in this place for 7 or 8 generations before my parents purchased the farm. And Gassac takes its name from the little stream that flows in the middle, provide a natural kind of ecosystem, a little bit of humidity when we have those dry summer, but also a very cool microclimate, which is key to the Mas de Daumas Gassac vine growing and vinification. So in 1972, they found this old farm, no idea of making wine. I don't know if any of you remember wine from the Languedoc in the 70s, but those were not the most kind of well-known wine. In fact, I think you have a term in English that says blanc, and that's what was maybe used at the time to describe some of the wine coming from this very large area that is the Languedoc. Languedoc as itself has more vineyard than the total of Australian vineyards. So it's a large place, which means sometimes it's difficult to grasp, but also it's a land of opportunity. Because if you go to the mountain, you can grow Chenin Blanc or Petit Manzin. Down in the plain, maybe Picpoul and Merlot. On the side of the Corbières, there is more Grenache and Mourvèdre. So there's really a wide range of varieties. But in the 70s, it was definitely a challenging time because the Languedoc was not recognized and was struggling. And so when my parents bought Mas Daumas, they thought about it as a house. The house came with some land, some farming land that was abandoned. And it took them a couple of years to renovate the house and then start thinking, okay, what should we do with that land? The immediate answer was plant asparagus or olive trees. Those were the local things to grow back then. But then, as luck happened, a very good friend of my dad, Professor Henri Enjalbert, who used to be the dean, the headmaster of the University of Geography in Bordeaux, so in his kind a soil expert, came to visit Mas de Daumas. He came to visit my parents, and my dad said, "Hey, Henri, would you mind having a look at the terroir, at the soil, and letting us know whether we should plant carrots or potatoes?" In those words. Fortunately for us, and otherwise we wouldn't be here tonight, or maybe we'll be here tasting carrots or potatoes. Nothing wrong with that, but I do prefer tasting wine. And Henri Enjalbert, after a week, came back and said, "I've done a few kind of research in your soil, and one of the research was done right here where we are, at the top of the estate, 550 meters of altitude. On my right, toward the south, I have the Mediterranean Sea. On my left, towards the north, I have the Massif Central, le Massif des Cévennes, so cold weather, cold wind coming down at the Effet de Piémont. And in the middle, you have this tiny, tiny valley, the Gassac Valley, where Henri Enjalbert found, just nested in the valley, a unique soil, as he called it, similar to Côte d'Or in some ways, very, very poor in organic nutrient, very, very rich in mineral nutrient, where the Gassac adventure began, because he added, look, he said to my parents, I believe you have a terroir that will enable you to make a Grand Cru wine. But I also believe it takes 100 or 200 or 300 years to get to that level. And I do recommend that if you do plant vine, you just try to make a good wine, but nothing exceptional. And at that time, I think my parents had no idea what being a winemaker or being a viticulture meant. So they launched into that adventure blindly without realizing the mountain that they were about to climb. And so Mas de Daumas Gassac was born within the next few years. 78 was the first vintage. In 1981, Jane McQuitty, or 82, wrote in the London Times, we have found the Lafitte of the Languedoc. Someone else say more like a Latour. Then someone say the Petrus of the south. Nowadays we're known as Mas de Daumas Gassac. But as you can imagine, back in the 80s, when this was a tiny, tiny estate, the only wine estate alive in this region, it helped tremendously to put Mas de Daumas Gassac in the map of the wine connoisseurs. We're still a family business. We're still a tiny estate nested in the middle of 4,000 hectares of forest. The local forest you see around is called the garrigue, dry kind of oak trees, a lot of herb, sage, rosemary, lavender, thyme. I can smell some thyme right here. And that influenced the ecosystem of our vineyard. We have a vineyard nested in, you can't see the vineyard because the vineyard is nested as 67 plots in the middle of 4,000 hectares of forest. So we really worked on that ecosystem. We really have protected it. But back then, imagine a vineyard springing out of nowhere in a region that wasn't known and trying to make its place under the sun. So those recognition, those accolades back in the late 70s or early 80s definitely help setting the path for Mas de Daumas Gassac towards excellency.
And I think you have a pretty unique microclimate, don't you? I mean, I think you mentioned when I saw you in January that you harvest quite a lot later than your neighbors.
Indeed. So while I can't show you everything, but imagine again the sea on the right, the mountain on the left, and a narrow valley. We are on one side of the valley, we are on the south side on the valley, on top of the valley, and then the valley is very, very small, very narrow, and it's kind of sheltered by all those trees. And the Effet de Piémont means cold air coming from the mountain of the Larzac, getting stuck, especially during the night in the valley, and cooling down the whole vineyard. More so during the ripening season, which is June, July, August, September, when the temperature outside the valley during the day can reach 40 degrees, 35, 37 degrees, and at night it goes down to 25. We have the same temperature during the day, but at night we go down to 10 degrees. At the moment, when we are picking, every morning we start at 7 a.m., the grapes come in with at 11 degrees Celsius, which means we have a very, very slow ripening period. Instead of starting their ripening at every morning at 25 or 27, we get down to 10, and that really slows the maturity. That means that typically Daumas Gassac ends or starts its harvest 2 weeks after all our neighbors. Right now, pretty much everyone has finished or is about to finish this weekend. We are looking at another 10 days to 2 weeks, and that's quite normal for us. And that's what means, that search for excellency. It comes first and foremost from the ecosystem, from the microclimate, and then what we have to do as the Guibert family and the team is to respect that and to accompany that.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And you talk about a huge amount of forest and garrigue that the property encompasses, but actually the vineyards are tiny little parcels, aren't they, within those within the kind of garrigue and forest?
Yeah, it started with about 15 hectares in 1972 being planted, and from the early 80s, about 1 hectare per year was planted. In the last, to reach, I think by 2010, we'd reached 45, 47 hectares where we have 1/3 red or 2/3 red, 1/3 white, and a little bit of sparkling rosé with the young fruits. But one thing that has always driven the growth of Daumas Gassac is respect for that nature. First of all, we have a mother that was always the protector of that nature. In 1972 or 73, when my dad decided, wow, we can make a vineyard, why don't we wipe out all the forest in the valley? That makes an easy plot to work. The tractor can go from one end to another, and that's it. She said, pretty much my mother, Véronique, she said to my dad in exact those words, if you cut one tree, you are out of here. I'll divorce you, but you're the one living. So he respected that. She reminded us still every year, she reminded us, look, make sure you protect the environment, make sure you protect your ecosystem. Out of my 4 brothers, 3 of us live on the estate. We drink the Gassac from the Gassac water from the Gassac spring. This is our playground. It was our playground when we were kids growing up and building tree house. I don't build that many tree house nowadays. I play in the cellar, but it is still a playground that we do respect tremendously. And so today, Daumas Gassac is 50 hectares, divided in 67 plots in the middle of 3,600 hectares of forest, that local garrigue.
So a quick question from a couple of members. I mean, you enjoy playing in the vineyard, playing in the winery, but also playing in the vineyards. You have, I think, probably a record number of varietals growing in your vineyards, some of them weird and wonderful from various parts of Europe and beyond. Is there a particular reason? Are you still experimenting to see what works well, or what's the logic behind all of those grape varieties?
When I'm asked this question, why do you have all these grape varieties? And if I count, we have about 40, more or less, plus maybe 2 or 3 or minus 2 or 3. So that's between 35 and 45, all planted on Gassac, all organically farmed, they're all planted on their separate plots. So we know exactly where the Petit Arvin, which is the grape from Switzerland, where the Néerlescol from Israel, where the Petit Manzin from Jurançon, where the Chenin Blanc from the Loire Valley, where the Chardonnay from Burgundy, where the Viognier from the Rhone Valley, and so on are planted. And with our team of pickers, right now we have 57 pickers from 17 different nationalities living on the estate for a full month, picking every day according to the plan we give them. We being myself, my brother, and our vineyard manager. Every day we say, okay, we need to go and pick the Petit Arvin there, the Chenin Blanc there, and so on. I wish my dad was there because he could answer your question. Why so many? Part of me thinks because he was a mad creator that loved doing things differently. And part of me has to acknowledge, I've been making the wine for 26 vintage now. Part of me has to acknowledge that it's like painting. Yes, you can paint with one color, but painting with many color, or cooking. you cook, you know, one ingredient, you are going to use salt, pepper, spices, olive oil. You don't need a lot, but a little bit of cumin, a little bit of saffron, a little bit of pepper or olive oil can just bring out so much more flavor. And at Daumas Gassac, what we are doing in the cellar is a bit of a cooking of all these grape varieties that are coming in as spices. For example, for the white, you have 4 major ingredients: Chenin, Chardonnay, Viognier, Petit Manzin. Everything else is a little spice we bring in to add acidity, flavor, anthocyane, color, aromatics, and so on. For the red, it's a bit easier. Cabernet Sauvignon accounts for 2/3, and then everything else: Cabernet Franc, Malbec, Merlot, Pinot Noir, Nebbiolo, Dolcetto, Tannat, Tempranillo, Petit Verdot, Syrah, Condorny. I can do it reverse, but I need to drink more. It's all there.
Talking of drinking, a few questions also about the earlier vintages. How do I mean, you've obviously been doing it for 26 vintages now, so 1999. How do the older vintages fare at the moment for drinking? And some members have got vintages going in our reserves here, going back sort of 10, 15 years. How might they expect the wine to change over the years?
Ewan, the old vintage of Daumas Gassac are terrible. Send them back to us. We will take back free of charge, of course. You know, I'll take them off your hand. No, seriously, so every 10 years we do a vertical of all our reds, and every 5 years we do a vertical of all our whites. And we go back to 78. The last vertical was done in June 2024. There's no vintage that are gone if they are properly stored. We're talking about vintage wines that have been stored at Daumas Gassac, underground cellar, 75% humidity, 14 to 16 degrees Celsius, so perfect condition. Obviously, some like 1979, 19 maybe 83 are starting to be, like, I would say, drink now. I'm not sure if they will wait another 10 years. Surprisingly, the first vintage, 1978, full of youth. You have the odd bottle that is absolutely singing, and you have also the one that doesn't sing that much. That's we all know that past a certain age, that can happen. With regard to the last 20 years, I'm loving Daumas Gassac. I'm a bit kind of, what do you say, privileged. I can choose the size. So I have quite a lot of magnums. And as we know, magnums age in a slower manners. So I love Daumas Gassac red, kind of in the 10 to 20 years of age. It still has a lot of grip, but it's those tannin have started to round up. And obviously, with the tagine, with a wild boar kind of slow cook preparation, with a roasted lamb. For those vegetarian, we had that last night. Caponata, courgette, and aubergine. No need for absolutely meat. It's absolutely delicious. So on 2023 vintage in my cellar, I taste a couple of bottles the first year just to see how they are. Then I wait 5 years because I found that it's after the 4th or 5th years that it starts to reopen. And my favorite, if I get a choice, it's like that 15 years benchmark. I am a bit privileged, as I said, because I do have quite every year, so I can choose. Although some of the older vintage I don't have that much, but 12 to 15 years is absolutely surprisingly. It's what really my peak. And surprisingly enough, for the white, it's more or less the same. Maybe not as long, but the 12 right now, the 2012, absolutely amazing. And 2012, that's what? That's 12 years old or 13 years old. 2012, 2010, 2011, that bracket right now is absolutely amazing. Again, I'm drinking from magnums, but that's really a bracket of time that I enjoy.
And Samuel, would you say that the style of the wine has evolved since your father started? In other words, are you making wines with less extraction or less tannin or more finesse, or have the wines evolved?
I think the simple answer to your question is yes. And then there are many explanations. First of all, when my parents started, they had to start with young vineyard. Before being 52 years old, I had to be 10 years old, and then 15, and then 20, and then 30. And the vineyard is the same. And a young vineyard of Cabernet Sauvignon, and by young, I mean, and especially since all our plants are non-cloned. So the young vineyard, by less than 25 years old, tend to produce a beautiful fruit, but quite rustic, quite in your face, quite rough, sometimes around the edges. And, to polish that was possible, but you still ended up with a wine that would be quite severe in the early stage. And in fact, I remember when I started coming to the UK market, probably in the late 90s, early 2000, the reputation of Daumas Gassac Red was undrinkable for 10 years, magnificent after. And it's very interesting because in the last 25 years, we've changed completely that perception. And I see more and more fine dining restaurant or gastropub listing the young vintage by the glass, which tells you something. It tells you that the wine have achieved something a bit more approachable, a bit more finesse, elegance in their youth. They still age very well, but the early stage is probably become easier. There's another explanation, and that's the human factor. My dad was of the old school. My dad passed away in 2016. He was 90 years old. He had a beautiful life, but he was at school that if a wine, red wine, you didn't chew it, kind of, it wasn't a real wine. And he felt that not only for the Daumas Gassac wine, but also for entry-level wine, the Moulin Gassac. And that was his style. And I met quite a few of his fellow winemaker of the same generation. And they liked wine that you almost had to chew initially. They were kind of tight and not big alcoholic, but quite tight and strong. I am of a generation that believe that, you can still be an amazing person or an amazing wine and still display finesse in the youth. Whether it's not about being right and wrong, but that's what drives us. So over the last 26 years, the team in the cellar and myself, and I'm blessed to have a cellar master who's been there for 35 vintage. So we've seen the evolution. We've been able to implement through maybe the time we pick, shorter maceration. Instead of doing 6 weeks, maybe we do 4 weeks and a half, a lot of things, and the age of our vineyard, a lot of things are enabling us to achieve, I believe, more finesse, more elegance in the youth. The same tannic potential, but those tannin, instead of being quite rustic and rough, they are more polished and are more elegant in the youth.
That's very interesting because from my relatively short experience of buying wines from your part of the world and from southwest France, I notice a lot of the top estates are making wines that are more approachable and have more freshness and finesse and are easier to drink in their youth. And that doesn't mean to say that the wines won't keep as long, but I was at Saint-Jean-de-Béziers earlier in the year, and they're doing exactly the same. And I think the results speak for themselves. So I think it's a natural evolution these days.
Yeah, and it takes time to understand your terroir. I tried to summarize everything in a few words, but right now I could turn around, and if you could see behind those bushes, there's a plant of Pinot Noir that was planted by my dad. Once that vineyard started to die off, we know we're not going to replant it here. We're going to replant it in a cooler place in the valley, because when they started, there was no vineyard. There had been vineyard in the Gassac Valley, but about 1,000 years ago. So there were trace of vineyard, but we didn't have anything to go on in terms of experience of our own terroir. We knew we had something unique, but then you find out that it's not just one terroir, it's 4 terroirs in the Gassac Valley. And the microclimate, whether you are in the end of the valley or the beginning, is not the same. So what my brothers and I are doing probably more than ever in the last 10 years is really looking at understanding perfectly what is our terroir, and terroir with S. Where does we get the cold influence? Where do we get the warmer influence? Where do we go at night or in the morning? We used to plant north and to south facing. We're planting now east to west, for example, things like that. Little things, but we are adjusting little by little. Obviously, someone who doesn't leave the vineyard every day of the year cannot see that, but someone who works here would look at it from the picture 20 years ago to 10 years ago to now is tremendously different, those by little adaptation.
And is the terroir very different from parcel to parcel? Or, I think it's predominantly limestone soil, isn't it?
So where we are on the top, it's more of the limestone, lutetion limestone, kind of rock, white little gravel or little mid-sized rocks, that where the white grapes tend to be the best. And that's why I'm saying we're going to take the reds that still remain on top, away when we have to replace those vineyards. In the valley, we have a very fine red powdery soil. It's a glacial soil with very fine flintstone and very, very rich in mineral. So rich that in 1982, we sent our first parcel of Daumas Gassac to Canada, and it went to Quebec. And the SAQ, the body that take care of the wine import, has its own lab, and every wine that comes in Quebec has to go through that analysis. And our parcel of Daumas Gassac Red was stopped at the lab and at the border because it contained too much gold. Not enough, unfortunately, not enough for me to have a gold watch. But we had to prove by doing our own soil analysis here at Gassac that the terroir Gassac contained a level of gold that is higher than what is usually accepted. So many things that happen in this valley that we don't see, even like a mile away from here, a kilometer away out of the Gassac, we don't see it. And that's why this is so specific of Mas de Daumas Gassac. And Mas de Daumas Gassac sometimes doesn't represent all the, is not in the same category of wine style of its neighborhood. First, we were by 20 years probably the first one to start making wine here, but also the terroir. If I go 1 kilometer away, and we have vineyard 1 kilometer away, certainly the Cabernet Sauvignon is not suited any longer. The Chenin Blanc, the Marsanne doesn't work, but the Grenache, the Carignan, the Syrah does tremendously well. So really here we have our own terroir that is unlike anything, and that's why it's probably taking us at least 2 generations to fully start understanding it.
That's it.
Sorry, you go ahead, Ewan.
Yeah,
go
just
ahead.
A question. In that way, I mean, you're obviously doing things differently to your neighbours, and other top producers are changing in the way you describe. Do you think that the red will always remain majorité Cabernet Sauvignon, or are there chances of evolution in that direction?
Cabernet Sauvignon is a big story in the Gassac Valley. We have a name for the Cabernet Sauvignon. We call it the king of the valley. And there is a reason for that. There is not a single vintage since 78, but I will start just since 2000, since that's when I started, where Cabernet Sauvignon wasn't the best, not just looking, tasting, analysis, a great variety of the valley. If I look at the rest, they do great, but there is always an element where 1 year the Pinot Noir is going to be overripe, Nebbiolo and Dolcetto slightly unripe. The Cabernet Sauvignon always does tremendously well. And it's because the terroir of the Gassac Valley is only in the Gassac Valley. As soon as we get out, it's not there. It's hard for people outside to understand why we are different. But we are not different by choice. We're different because the terroir, we listen to the terroir. The terroir said, no Syrah. We tried the Syrah. The Syrah didn't do well. No Grenache. We tried the Grenache. No, but Cabernet Sauvignon did well. So we're stuck with Cabernet Sauvignon, unfortunately for those who are not a fan of Cabernet Sauvignon. But that's what Daumas Gassac DNA is, and it's not by choice. It's not to be different. It's the terroir that led us to plant Cabernet Sauvignon in this plot.
Interesting.
Tim, you've just muted.
Sorry,
yourself.
I accidentally muted myself. You touched on respect for nature, and this is something that's clearly been part of the DNA of Daumas Gassac pretty much from the start. And we all know that sustainability is becoming more and more important. Perhaps members would be interested just to hear a little bit about what you do on the sustainability side in your estate.
But you have to understand that we came from a family, and again, I thank my mother for that, who, until I left home, all we ate was the vegetable grown on our home garden. My dad was an avid planter. So for him, while people go and play golf or maybe tennis to relax, he would go with his shovel and his beche, he will go to his garden and spend 2 or 3 hours planting or something. And so I think in the DNA, before being Gassac DNA. The respect of nature and understanding the nature, growing up in the middle of a forest, because we grew up in the middle of the forest, harvesting wild asparagus, harvesting the truffle when it comes to mushroom, that has always been there. And for us, we see the impact of anything that happens from the outside. We see the impact of the drought on the vineyard that are not surrounded by forest. The forest is a natural protection. It acts as a defense against frost, against hail, against torrential rain, against heat, because the trees, when you take the leaf of a tree, it perspires a little bit, create a bit of humidity that is going to feed the vineyard. We see it year on year off. On the year there was a terrible frost in 2021, that took 80% of the, sometimes 80%, sometimes 40% of the vineyard across Europe. We only got 20% damage, and those were the vineyards that were not totally surrounded by forest. What have we done additionally to never using chemical, never using pesticide, doing everything? We try to push it a bit further. So work by hand has been there since day one. What we're doing in the last 15 years is we're planting even more trees. Those vineyards I'm talking about that are not totally surrounded by the forest, we're making sure now we're planting, and I've been planted for the last 10, 12 years, haze of trees around the vineyard. I'll tell you a little story. Our vineyard manager, Mathieu, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, had this plan with the team and said, we're going to plant every year 500 trees. Let's go to the nursery, get the trees, plant them. They did that. The first year, out of 500 trees, only 100 survived. He said, I'm done, too much time. It takes a lot of time to plant, to water. It's a lot of time that you're not dedicating to the vineyard. You're dedicating to planting trees that are not going to produce anything. So I don't know, say, I'm done. His team, our team, but his team went to him and said, no, we'd like to continue, but let's do it different. And so what they did is they say, okay, we're only going to plant 100 trees, but rather than going to the nursery, to go and get the trees from right here, from the forest. And so we're talking about they understood that by getting trees and little plants that were already indigenous to the soil would give more chance to those plants to grow. And the result was right there. The second year, out of 100 plants planted, I think 80 or 90 survive. So little things like that. We're still learning. We think we know everything, but every year we learn more. What else? We've been all our water usage in the cellar is being recuperated, and that has started 30 years ago, way before it was made compulsory and so on. I don't know any point where we can make sure we protect the natural habitat, and I say we live there first and foremost. Any point where we can do it, we go fully there. It's not about saving cost.
Excellent. Thank you. That's fascinating.
And recently, also another example. When we harvest, typically we would harvest. So we pick. We have a team of 50 pickers. They pick in small bucket, 15 kilos bucket, but one has to get those buckets and load them on a lorry. We would use a tractor with a lorry going through the vineyard to get all those buckets, send them to the cellar. Where at the cellar we empty them, we sort them, and they go in the cellar. In order not to compress the soil, and we were using small tractor. We changed everything 12 years ago or 13 years ago for quads. So quads probably have a quarter of the weight of a tractor, small lorry at the back, and they are the only one now. We no longer use any big heavy machine, and we use those small quads just to, again, it's a little detail, but by avoiding compressing the soil, we're making sure that the soil remain alive. Because I'm sure you know, and all the participant knows, that the most important is for in our work is everything comes from the soil. And if the soil is alive, it means that it's been fed by underground creatures, mostly worms. They dig small galleries that bring oxygen and food deep into the soil. And the soil is completely kind of regenerated by all those worms and underground creature, insects. If you compact the soil, it's a death of a soil. There's two things that can make a soil die. Too much chemical and compacting the soil. Too much heavy machine means that the soil is so compacted that when you try to dig through it, it's impossible. When there is torrential rain, the rain, instead of filtration going into the soil, it just erodes everything. So one thing leads to another, one thing explains another. I can't go into too much details, but that's what we work with. We work with a chain kind of operation where if we make the right decision, we might not need to put chemical, we might not need to do all of that, but it's making those choices. Another choice we make every time we have to replace a vineyard. Usually most people will wait 4 years, pull out the vineyard, wait 4 years, replant. At Daumas Gassac, we wait 5 to 7 years. That means that for 5 to 7 years, I'm putting a cross on a half an hectare, 1 hectare production. If you own a restaurant and you say, for the next 5 years, I have 100 tables, I'm taking 2 tables out for the next 5 or 7 years, even if my restaurant is full. And you do that with 2 or 3 vineyards. So we're trying to go to the end of excellency, not saying we do a little bit to see how it is. We go to the end, and hopefully that nature take care of itself.
Right.
Excellent.
You know what?
Yeah,
before you send a couple of questions, I am just going to share with the members who are with us. I'm sorry you can't be with me. And that's a first. No one has done that before. It's a little bit of the white 2025. So we are in 2025. We just harvested that. We finished harvest last week. This is a little bit of the first blend. It's still in the middle of fermentation. Fermentation goes, we look at the density. So density starts at 1,100 and it goes to 990, and we are around 1,025. So still quite a bit of sugar, probably about 60 grams. As you can see, it's fizzy. It's cloudy because it still hasn't been sedimented, and I wouldn't give it to many people because it's not a hard stage. It's quite pleasant, but it's when you're used to finished wine, it's not the easiest stage. But since I'm talking a lot and it's only fruit juice, I can swallow it. It's magnificent. This year, the acidity and the pH are just phenomenal. We started by the Chenin Blanc, first time ever. Usually, we always start with Chardonnay and Viognier. But going through the vineyard, through the whole month of August, we go with the whole team 1-2 times a week. We taste, we look at the leaves, we looked at the berries, we looked at the seeds inside, are they green, are they brown? At the end, we look at the analysis, but the analysis never makes the decision. Decision is made by observation and taste. And so for the first time since I'm at Daumas Gassac, the 26th vintage, we decided to start with Chenin Blanc because the Chenin Blanc was so pure, so clean, so well preserved and fresh acidity that we wanted to keep that freshness and then bring the Chardonnay and Viognier with all the Chardonnay brings more of the body, and the Viognier bring the aromatics that is going to dominate in the youth and then slightly disappear. And Petit Manzin more acidity. So this year is, if someone asked me what was unique about this year, the white starting with Chenin Blanc, something we've never done. Maybe we'll never do it again. But I'm glad we made that decision because it was the right one. Not a huge crop. Quite similar to 2024, we make about 40,000 bottles of Daumas Gassac white. Half of that goes to 70 countries around the world, so about 20,000, and the rest goes to the French market. And this wine still has to go through a couple of weeks of fermentation. Then we let it rest for 6 months in the cold, so it sediments and it becomes clear again. And then in 6 months we'll see what it does. But there is no oak on the white. It's all stainless steel to preserve the sharpness and the minerality of the Chenin Blanc, Petit Manzin, and the expression of the fruit, the Chardonnay and the Viognier. Sorry,
And
you were going to ask a question.
Is it too early, Samuel, to give an idea of the style of wine that you will get specifically from the 25 vintage? Because obviously you haven't finalized the blend yet. Do you know roughly whether it'll be a richer style?
I have an idea.
I
have an idea. It's despite the fact that there were a couple of weeks intense heat in July and 1 week intense heat in August, it's been first of all a very, very wet spring, which was magnificent. The Gassac River had stopped flowing for the last 5 years. It was flowing 1, 2, 3 months a year and stopped. Since March, it's full on again. The Gassac River, it's at full speed, full of water, and that gave us a sign that the water reserves are back. And so enough water fell on the Gassac territory in the spring in order to retain enough humidity to go through the summer. So this summer we had heat, but not too much. We didn't have much rain, but the water we got in the spring was enough. And in fact, if I could show you the vineyard, I can't there, but it's all super green. There's no trace of drought, which usually shows by yellow leaves and so on. So that's an indication to me that the vineyard didn't suffer. And in fact, when we picked the fruit, we saw fruit that were scarce, not a huge crop, because and small berries, because it was a dry summer, but a beautiful concentration. And because we made the decision to pick slightly early the Chenin Blanc, we have right now, I think I put a note of the, if I look right now at the analysis, we are looking at a white that will be about 13.2% alcohol. So that's kind of in the average low. Typically, Daumas Gassac is between 12.7 and 13.5. So 13.2 is pretty average, kind of in a good way. The pH is 333, so 330 is quite a acidic pH, and acidity is close to 4. So that again says that a lot of freshness, a lot of minerality. I think that we will end up with a wine more in the mineral kind of side. We're not talking about obviously a Sauvignon Blanc or a Sancerre or something like that. We're talking about something with a lot of minerality, but a lot of aromatics with the Viognier and with the Chardonnay. More so than maybe a vintage like, was it 2017, maybe 2022, which was more in the richer style.
Yeah.
So a quick question from me, sorry. If we're carrying on in that commercial vein, 2025, I know that, Tim, you'll be talking in a little while about our En Primeur offer of the white and the red. There's one question here: when will the 2025 be ready for sale? Or when will we be putting it on sale?
Next week.
25... Okay, are you saying when it's ready for sale, or are you asking when it is released in bottle?
So we will be selling it en primeur. It will be released. It will be ready to drink, ready for sale. So there's 3 questions really.
So
yeah, go Tim. Sorry.
Well, in terms of when will the wine be offered, as you touched on right at the start, Ewan, we will be launching the 25 white, the white that Samuel was tasting a moment ago. We'll be launching that En Primeur next week, along with the 2024 red. But the wine won't be shipped until next year, obviously, because it needs time to develop. But for me, I'm going to be writing the offer tomorrow, and to hear Samuel talking about the 25 vintage, this gives me a great insight into how the wine will be, so that I can describe it to members in our En Primeur offer.
Okay.
And we bottle, to be clear, the wine that is offered en primeur is bottled toward the end of the winter. There is a reason why we bottle in winter. It's because we don't filter wine. We make very natural wine in a sense. We try to unpack the least possible the winemaking process. So by bottling in winter, we favor cold. We're doing it through cold temperature, which favor the precipitation of tartric acid, but all the sediment that might still be in the wine. And so typically we will bottle the white current in February and the red towards end of February, and then it's shipped whenever kind of it's ready. But there's a logic in when at Daumas Gassac when we bottle. We don't just do it because it's convenient for us. We do it because it's best for the wine to do it at that time.
Okay. A few technical questions coming in, which sure. One might lead into what Tim is going to say. From a red point of view, you've already told us that the white is matured in stainless steel, so it doesn't see any wood. The reds, how do you deal with your reds? So how will you have dealt with the 2024?
Good timing. I'm pouring myself some red. And I didn't know you were going to ask this question. No, 24. Well, 24 was a very interesting vintage. One that, again, I have not remember many vintage like that. Typically in the south, even if we have a cooler microclimate here, we're always careful of over-ripeness. Over-ripeness translating to high alcohol, low acidity, maybe rich and very flavorsome wine, but sometimes lacking a bit the balance and freshness. even in the southern France, and even with the Cabernet, which has a very hard time to go high in alcohol. But we are careful of that. In 2024, there was none of that. Actually, people were trying to get to ripeness. And I remember talking to my brother and saying, this year, I don't think we can look for over-ripeness, even in some of the other grapes. You know, the way we play around with grapes, Cabernet will pick it when it's ripe, where we might get slightly over-ripeness with the Merlot, slightly over-ripeness with the Malbec. There are a couple of grapes that we do want that over-ripeness to express more kind of aromatics. And that 2024 was one of those years where everything was very slow maturing, which is ideal, but at no point was there an acceleration. Quite often you see things accelerating mid-August or mid-September towards the last month of picking. None of that happened in 2024. And we felt like we could go on until October and we would never reach over-ripeness. We'll never get to 14 or 15% alcohol, which again is a great thing, at least for the style of wine we want. But it was quite disconcerting for some of our neighbors. You know, they were waiting. And then there is a point on the turn off from summer to autumn is called les equinox. Equinox is arriving not this weekend, but next weekend. It's you know, we always know that around the 22nd of September, there is 75% chance that we end up with a big storm or weather change. Equinox mean that in this region. Even in sunny Languedoc, we do get that. And so it's a bet to say, okay, I'm betting that there won't be much rain and then we can carry on and wait until early October, or I'm betting that it's better to pick earlier. We didn't get much of that rain last year, but the fruit were not evolving. And at some point, you know, the fruit, the ripeness is like this. It's a slope going up, and then there is a plateau. And the plateau is a week to 10 days. If you miss a plateau, you start declining. Today, I went to see a vineyard that is a neighbor's vineyard. They asked for my opinion. Should we pick that Cabernet or not? And half of that vineyard was already declining. It was on a soil that was not porous at all. And the soil was too compacted. And half of the vineyard, the berries were starting to desiccate, to dry. And I said to him, you know, you should have picked maybe a week ago. And usually I'm one to wait the Cabernet, but I think they waited too long. That's my opinion. I'm not sure if I'm right, but that's what I thought. And in 2024, it felt like the plateau was reached around mid-September. And so we picked everything between the 12th of September to keep a few grapes of Cabernet fresh, very fresh. And I think we finished on the 23rd or 26th of September. As I say, we didn't get that rain. And we have a wine, again, 2024. I have the analysis in front of me. 1293 is the alcohol level. So again, we're talking about a sunny region where you might get wine from this region getting to 14.5% alcohol. 1293 put alcohol, and that we know for sure because the wine is finished, is currently aging in the barrel. 1293 alcohol, 345 pH, which is for Cabernet, ensure great aging potential, and about 365, 366 acidity. So if I just looked at those analyses, I would say a wine that displays lots of freshness, a lot of vibrancy without even tasting it. And with that kind of pH, a wine with acidity. And acidity in a wine is like the backbone in the body. If you don't have a good backbone, you stand like that. And it's the same for a wine. If you have a good backbone, you stand straight. A wine that wants to age needs to have a good backbone. So good and sharp acidity. With that good and sharp acidity, you can defy time, 10, 20, 15, 20 years, maybe more. But already 10, 15 years, that's a good time.
Brilliant. A question about going back into the vineyard very briefly was, do you use any products in your vineyard? Because things like cuivre, like copper sulfate, is allowed in organic and practices and the like. Do you, despite the fact that some people would say that depending on the level, it can be quite toxic, how do you treat your vines in that way?
So when people ask me, are you organic, are you bio? We've inherited from a dad, my parents were, they didn't have it, they hated any labeling. So they did everything based on their belief and their soul rather than to fit in a box. And I must say, we've had that debate many, many times. We are big advocate of doing everything with a natural process, including no chemical, no pesticide. And the funny thing, if I can use that word funny, is you can be organic, and being organic or bio accept level of copper that is beyond what we think is good for the soil. So we rather not fit any box, but we use copper as a minimum, but we're very careful with it, because too much copper, even if it's accepted in an organic kind of labeling, will destroy your soil. What we use nowadays, make sure that everything is certified without any obviously GMO. There's so many, is all approved by Demeter, is all fit in the organic and bio, but then it's choice. It's choice of using a product against another. And I won't pretend to be an expert on that, but fortunately we do work with our vineyard manager. That's his expertise, to choose what needs to be used as the most gentle things that needs to be used. Because when you have, for example, an attack of caterpillar in the vineyard, you need to do something. So we use a lot of confusion sexual confusion, where that's not a product. You put a little trap in the vineyard. You have to put it every 5 rows, and it display a pheromone that is going to confuse the male, and the male are not going to reproduce themselves. That works. We work a lot with that, with a lot of insects. It's a lot more work, but it seems to work. I must also add that we are located in an area, in a region where it is easier to be chemical free or pesticide free. If we were in a more rainy place, a more humid place, that's when the trouble happens. Because when you say humid, it means disease automatically. It's a lot harder to work with a high level of humidity, mildew, and combating it in an organic way. In the southern France, we benefit from the sun, which pretty much, our main issue is not enough rain, and that kind of transfer. Our issues are not the same that what you might hear from other regions.
That's great. Fabulous. There's a question here, maybe more for Tim than for Samuel. We've currently got the 2017 as museum release, and I know from the comments at the start that some people are tasting that this evening to accompany Samuel's chat. Any other museum releases in the pipeline of Mas de Daumas Gassac?
Not at the moment, but we've got good stock of the 17, which I tasted in January when I visited Samuel, and it was showing extremely well. I thought it was absolutely delicious. So, and it's fully mature, ready to go. So much to be enjoyed there.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're blessed with again, we put in place with my team about 20 years ago what we call a 10 years release, where every year, whether we sell out of the current vintage or not, we put aside about 3,000 bottles, which is not huge, but when you think about 3,000 bottles for a vineyard like us, set aside for 10 years, that's 30,000 bottles, and that starts to add. And we keep them in our underground cellar in perfect condition and release them after 9 or 10 years. It's a great way to discover Daumas Gassac, young with the current vintage, but also with the 8 or 9 or 10 vintage, and discover the side I was talking about, where you're no longer just on the fruit, but you're starting to get those other aromas, other flavors, maybe a bit more kind of subdued. But if you give it time, especially Daumas Gassac does benefit from oxygen. If you decant it and give it time, and with the red, I do recommend it's a food wine. The white can go by itself. It's good, marvelous, even almost just on its own. The red does call for a bit of food to polish the palate and match, because you have so many different flavors coming from those 20 grape varieties. They do call for a bit of food to match.
Okay.
Excellent.
I think you were talking about wild boar earlier on has got me very hungry indeed. I do love a bit of Sanglier. It's very Asterix, of course.
We love wild boar, but we love them outside the vineyard.
Outside the vines.
In 2016, we built 18 kilometers fence ourselves all around the vineyard just to keep them out, because the damage they could do eating the fruit was so great that, and actually the fence paid itself in 2 years. But it was quite a tremendous job to fence the whole vineyard and make sure those nice tasting beasts stay outside the vineyard and don't come and eat us. They are becoming a real nuisance, and not just in the southern France, but you go to Italy, you go to Spain, almost everywhere.
And I gather, Samuel, that you have to actually, the fence has to go several centimeters underground because they try to dig under the fences.
Absolutely. Our neighbors just put a fence, but they only, if the ground is there, they put it there, and you can already see holes. So you have to put something that goes at least 5 centimeters underneath, because they will dig. You know, when you go through, you can go through a vineyard and you see huge hole, and that's a wild boar. They're going through roots, or sometimes mushroom, sometimes truffle. And so if they want to go under a fence, they will go under a fence if the fence is not very sturdy or quite deep down. They don't jump too high, but they do dig down.
Well, Samuel and Tim, we're drawing to our closing time now. So I wanted to say on behalf of everybody who has been watching and everyone who will be watching on our YouTube channel later, a huge thank you to what has been very interesting, very entertaining. It's lovely to actually have you in your natural habitat, Samuel.
Yes.
So thank you very much indeed. And also a big thank you to Benjamin, who has been doing all the camera work.
Well, Benjamin deserves a nice, you know, when we hang up, we're going to enjoy the rest of the bottle you saw on the table. I think him and I will think enjoy that with, and we have just a magnificent view. The vineyard of Gassac, you can see a few in front of you, but the Massif Central and the footstep I was talking about just in front of us, right there. So right there, if I drive for 8 hours, I will be in Paris. If I drive even lower, longer and go the channel, I'll reach you guys in a few hours. But that's where we live in. That's it's always a bit challenging to do it like that, but hopefully we made it alive. And the best way to get to know us more is, of course, come and see us. At Daumas Gassac, we welcome people without appointment, without any fees, all year round. We're delighted to show what we do during the harvest or outside, and share a little bit of the passion that lives in our heart in the Guibert family and our team. Cheers.
That's fantastic.
Thank you, Samuel.
Thank you to you. And we'll be in touch about some live events maybe next year. I know Benjamin and I have been talking about that happening soon. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks everyone for watching, and have a very good evening, whether you're drinking Daumas Gassac or not. Bye-bye.
Bonne soirée, tout le monde. Good evening.
Thank you very much. Au revoir.
Merci, Samuel.
Au revoir.